Oh, everybody. Nice to be back. It's been forever since I've been here. Only kidding. It was just yesterday. I hope you're doing all right. Hope you're having a nice day. And that lots of exciting and fun things have happened to you today. Like winning the lottery and eating a donut and stroking a lovely fluffy kitten. Because you'll need those things, let's face it. You'll need a few nice things to happen in order to prepare for the very worst things that happen in this horrible, horrible book that I wrote called The Fury. Just to sum up very, very quickly, Cal, Daisy and Brick have all been attacked by people they know and love, and have now managed to find each other and are holding out in a place called Fursville, an old abandoned theme park. They've just been joined by Rilke, who has also been attacked by some strangers who wanted to kill her, and her brother, Schiller, who got attacked so badly that he kind of froze. He's basically frozen all over. He's freezing cold, he's covered in frost, and they don't know why. And they've all just met up. Rilke's just arrived, and they don't know anything about this other thing that's happening in the book, which is this corpse in London which won't stop inhaling. And is now in a kind of a security services cell, being examined by a priest. Okay, Rilke, Fursville, 6:37 a.m. They sat on the roof of the pavilion, eating crisps and bread and taking turns to tell their stories. The tall ginger boy went first, stuttering through his tale involving a psychotic girlfriend and an attack in a nearby garage. He was the one who had found this place, Fursville, and he was reluctant to share it. That didn't come across so much in his words as in the pauses between his words, slight hesitations in which Rilke seemed to be able to peer inside that copper dome of his and get a sense of what he was really thinking. Of course, it was probably hallucinations brought on by exhaustion. She'd been awake for well over 24 hours now. If that was the case, though, then what was it that made her lean forward when he had finished speaking and say, "Your girlfriend, she's still here"? The boy's mouth dropped open, his cheeks blazing, his fist crumpling up the slice of bread that he was holding. "Don't be stupid," he muttered. "Of course she's not." She didn't have to read his thoughts to know that that was a lie. The sun had hauled its lazy bulk up from the horizon, and daylight splashed across the roof, giving the four of them long, thin shadows that spilled over the edge. It was filthy up here, the spaces between the ventilation stacks and air conditioning units and aerials covered in bird mess and rotting debris. But there were comfy, moth-eaten directors' chairs that the park's staff had long ago dragged up here, and the view wasn't bad. If you looked to the left, that was, over the crests of the fake waves and across the flat, featureless land all the way to a distant factory. In the other direction lay the sea, the same one Rilke had spent all night on. She didn't want to look at it ever again. Still, at least it was warm and getting hotter by the minute. It occurred to her that they should fetch Schiller and leave him out in the sun, but it would be safer inside, at least until they knew what was going on. Out here the world seemed too big. Anything could happen. "What's your story anyway?" the ginger one asked, aggression in his voice. "Hang on," said the other kid, the one wearing tracksuit trousers. He was conventionally good looking, but beneath his messy hair his face was featureless and bland. "He's soft," thought Rilke. "He's a pushover." He wiped crisp crumbs from his lips, saying, "Let's stay friendly, okay? My name is Callum. This is Daisy. She's, 11? I'm nearly 13, corrected Daisy. I just look younger, that's all." The girl offered a nervous smile, and Rilke returned it. "And that's Brick," Cal went on, nodding at the ginger kid. "Why Brick?" Rilke asked. She took another piece of bread from the open bag, tearing off a sliver and putting it in her mouth. She felt like she was literally starving, but she didn't want to show weakness by scoffing down half a loaf. "Because my dad's motto is never hit anyone with your fist when you've got a brick," he growled. "Nice," she said, and she thought, Neanderthal. "What's your name?" asked Daisy. "Rilke," she said. "Rilke Bastian. The boy in there is my brother, Schiller." "Your parents like poetry then," said Brick, which threw her. How did a caveman like him know that they were both named after German poets? He smiled smugly, a smile that said, "Didn't expect that now, did you?" Daisy coughed politely, diffusing the tension. My parents, the smaller girl started, and in that pause Rilke's brain filled in the gaps. She didn't see it so much as just feel it, that weight, the awful gravity of two dead people in a bed. Daisy's face had crumpled like a paper bag left out in the rain, and Rilke had an urge to go to her, to wrap her arms around her. Girls had to look after one another. But Cal beat her to it, and she seemed to find strength in his arms. My mum, she didn't want to hurt me, Daisy went on. She was ill anyway. She had cancer in her head. It made her act strange. She took my dad and then herself so they wouldn't hurt me. Then the ambulance people tried to kill me, pushed me out of the window. The girl looked at the boy who held her. Cal found me. He saved me. I nearly didn't, though, said Cal, giving Daisy a squeeze, then letting her go. He told his story more smoothly than the others, as if he'd rehearsed it in his head. When he'd finished, he looked at Rilke. They all did. Now you. What could she say? She didn't have a clue what had happened. The only reason she was so calm about it all, so logical, was that the full force of it hadn't sunk in yet. None of it felt real. Maybe none of it was real. Maybe they'd got to the party and someone had slipped her some acid or ecstasy. Maybe all this was just a bad trip. She finished her bread, then shrugged, more to herself than the others. We got attacked at a party, a rave. Then suddenly we moved. We were in another... I don't know. Anyway, we managed to get away. I felt you guys speaking to me, so I brought my brother here. I thought you would know what was happening. I thought you'd have answers. I thought you'd be able to help us. Out of nowhere it hit her. A tidal wave of panic and fear and utter helplessness that sluiced through her brain. She clamped her teeth together until the feeling washed away. She couldn't afford to look weak in front of all these people. Not now. Not ever. It's too late, she realised, seeing the way Daisy stared at her, as though her thoughts were flashing across her forehead. She got to her feet, turning her back on them. It was starting to get hot, ridiculously so. We know what you know, said Cal behind her. And for a second she thought he was admitting to the ridiculous notion that they could read minds. That people are going crazy, he said, that they're filled with the fury. Rilke finished for him, the word not hers. She wondered if maybe it went both ways, if she could steal their thoughts too. Yeah, the fury, he said. It doesn't seem to affect them unless one of us is close. Then they just go mental, try to kill us. They seriously try to rip us to pieces. But afterwards they just go back to doing whatever they were doing, said Brick. They go back to their lives like nothing has happened. They totally forget that they went psycho. If you can get away from them, if you can get out of their radar, then they'll leave you alone. I think so, anyway. A couple of squabbling gulls flapped onto the roof, ogling the strangers warily before taking off again. Rilke turned back to the others. What about Schill, she asked. Why is he so cold? What's happened to him? They looked at each other, and she could sense the vast, black gulfs in each of their thoughts. They didn't have a clue. She shook her head, disgusted. So why bring me here? Because we're safer when we're together, said Daisy. That's it, she thought. She had to bite her tongue to stop from saying it out aloud. It's the only way we'll find out what's going on, said Cal. The more of us there are, the quicker we'll find answers. Well, I'm here now, Rilke snapped back. There are 5 of us. Where are the answers? A memory from the previous night swam back into her thoughts. The image of somebody driving a car, somebody else running through the woods. She shook her head, knocking them loose. It's not just us, is it? She said. There are others coming. Brick smiled without humour, leaning forwards in his chair and resting his head in his hands. You have no idea. Cal. Thursville. 10:54 a.m. There's a gap, said Cal. He pointed at a battered stretch of fence in the front right-hand corner of the park, almost hidden behind the bulk of the log flume. There were piles and piles of scaffolding back here, rusted poles propped up against the wilting barricade. It reminded him of a bamboo forest, like in all the old martial arts movies, and he could even see a scraggly bird's nest sitting precariously on the top of one. Where? Brick asked. The 2 of them had been scouting the perimeter for the last few hours to make sure the park was secure. It had been Cal's idea, and when he'd suggested it to Brick, the boy had seemed to take it as a personal insult, as though Cal had said, "Hey man, you're ugly, shall we see what we can do about it?" Daisy and the new girl, Rilke, were keeping an eye on Schiller. There, Cal said, stamping down a clutch of vicious-looking brambles in order to take a step closer to the fence. One corner had come loose from the ground, leaving a flap of steel. Behind it was the towering bulk of the laurel hedge which shielded the park from the street. Brick snorted. That's not a gap. Who's going to get through there? A midget? It's still a problem, said Cal, ignoring him. The place has to be as tight as we can make it. You never know what's going to happen. Oh, fine, put it on the list, Brick said, waving him away like a bad smell. Cal lifted his notebook, a restaurant order pad, and added log flume, loose panel to the other 2 breaches they'd found. I don't know what your problem is, mate, Cal said, running to catch up with the bigger boy. Haven't you ever seen zombie films? Once one gets in, they all get in, and if you're overrun then you're finished. Dead meat. These aren't zombies, Brick replied. They're not dead, for one thing. I know they're not real zombies, Cal said as they walked past a couple of carnival stalls, both of which had rotted in the sea air. Duh, but you know what I mean. They swarm. If one comes after you, they all do. Brick grunted, shrugging his shoulders. Oh, anyway, at least we're doing something, right? Cal went on as they walked up to the small, squat ticket office. Better this than sitting around in the dark twiddling our thumbs. Especially with that girl in there, Brick added, whispering, even though there was no way she could have heard them. She scares me more than the ferals out there. Cal laughed, the sound floating on the warm air, seeming to fill the whole park for a second, bringing it to life the way laughter had once kept its heart beating. You're not kidding, he said, keeping his own voice low and casting a secretive look back at the pavilion. I'm not going to sleep in the same room as her. She might kill me in the middle of the night. Then they were both sniggering into their hands. It felt good. It seemed like years since he'd laughed. It wasn't years, though. It was yesterday, remember? Yesterday, when things were still almost normal. But yesterday was gone. There was just before and before was 1,000,000 years ago. So, how well do you know this place? Cal asked, walking to the window of the ticket office and peering through the filthy glass. There was light inside, spilling through the massive hole in the roof and revealing a cash register with its tray open and empty, a couple of waterlogged magazines and a lot of dust. Like the back of my hand, Brick replied. Cal could see him reflected in the window, his hair like fire. He was picking his nose. I spent more time here than I have at home this year. I've pretty much been in every building. There's nothing left but junk. Cal walked down the side of the office, the main gates towering over him. A chain the size of a fire hose was looped around the ornate ironwork, and they'd been boarded up to hide the park from the street. There was a brick tower on each side, maybe 10 metres tall. A turquoise ladder ran up the left-hand one to the massive sign that straddled the entrance. There were 6 more nests lodged in the back-to-front letters. That's a good lookout post, Cal said. You can probably see 1/2 mile inland from up there. Yeah, if you want to sit around all day and bird crap, Brick said. What do we need a lookout for anyway? Nobody ever comes out here, I told you. Cal didn't reply. He just jotted it down in his notepad. Brick had a way of talking that instantly got your hackles up, but surely it was because of the situation they were in. There was a chance the guy might have always been an arsehole, but Cal was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. It was important that they got on. God only knew how long they'd been living here together. Gift shop, said Brick, nodding towards the building on the other side of the gate. Lost property too, it's empty, pretty much. Cal walked to it. The windows were boarded over, but one sheet of plywood had been pulled off to reveal a single square, glassless eye. He checked the gap between the building and the fence to make sure it was secure. So, you used to work out here or something? He asked as he joined Brick again. Me? Pff, hell no. This place was in ruins when I was like 7 or something. How old do you think I am? I just thought, with you being so tall and everything, Cal said, shrugging. 21, maybe? Brick snorted out a laugh. I'm 18, he said. Same as you, I wouldn't be surprised. I just had to grow up a bit faster, that's all. Cal studied him properly for the first time, seeing the freckles, the loose covering of fine ginger stubble, and his eyes. They were squinty and unwelcoming, but they were still those of a kid. You want to kiss me or something? Brick said, taking a step back and holding out his hands. You're giving me a weird look. Gross, said Cal, his cheeks heating. You wish. Plus, I'm 17. There was an awkward moment, then they both started laughing again. I'm glad we got that out of the way, Brick said. They walked along the side of the gift shop, entering a pool of jagged shadow thrown by the huge roller coaster on the southeast side of the park. There's another way in just here. It's the one I usually use. There's a gap in the fence that's hidden by the hedge, easy to sneak in and out of. It's... Cal froze, grabbing hold of Brick's arm. The bigger boy carried on speaking for a few more seconds before the words dried up in his throat. Then they both stared in silence at the path that led down between the toilets and the boo-boo station, peering into the gloom at the blonde-haired, blood-stained boy who stood there. He was young. He looked even younger than Daisy. He was wearing a pair of Adidas tracksuit trousers and a Batman t-shirt, both of which were coated with plum-coloured grime. His feet were bare and filthy. His near-white hair had been stained pink in places. His face, too, the dried blood making his skin look like parchment. He had no expression whatsoever. He looked like a shop window dummy, his eyes empty pockets. "Ah, it's one of them!" Brick hissed, taking a step back. Cal still had him by the arm, refusing to let go when Brick tried to pull away. "Cal, come on!" "Wait," Cal said. "I think he's okay. Don't you feel it?" There was something in Cal's head, that same deafening silence as before. It reminded him of the ocean on a calm day when the sea was as flat as glass, but you could still sense the vast, churning weight of water beneath the surface. Brick relaxed and Cal let him go. "Hey," Cal said, talking to the boy. He took a step towards him, his hands held up to show he didn't mean any harm. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" How had he got here? The boy didn't look like he could punch his way out of a wet paper bag, let alone travel to the armpit of Norfolk. Something definitely wasn't right with this picture. "We're not going to hurt you," Cal said, edging closer. He got down on one knee beside him. "Just let us know your name, or anything. Just say something so we know you're not one of them, yeah?" "You won't get that little git to talk." The voice came from the hedge, followed by the snapping of branches and the hammer of footsteps. Cal felt his skin grow cold as a double-barreled shotgun emerged through the broken fence. The guy who was holding it was in his late teens, maybe his early 20s, his thin face concealed by a scraggly beard. He was wearing a green farmer's jacket over a white shirt. He lifted the gun to his shoulder, aiming it right at Cal. "Don't move, or I'll blow your head off." Cal lifted his hands, backing away. At his side, Brick looked ready to bolt, his body tensing up. Then he obviously thought better of it. The man approached, swinging the gun from side to side. He drew level with the young boy, giving him a look that sent him scuttling away. "Get in here!" the gunman shouted. There was more rustling, then a girl appeared, her hair almost as red as the rings around her eyes. She stepped out and another boy squeezed through the fence. He looked the same age as Cal, tall but slightly overweight. They both wore the same expression. "Help us." "You better tell me what I'm doing here," the man said, jabbing the gun like it was a spear. "Why everybody in the goddamned world is trying to kill me, while you're inside my head, screwing with my thoughts." Cal held up his hands and took a step back, slipping on the rubble-strewn ground. "I said don't move!" the man barked. His finger was on the trigger, and it was tense. Even from here, Cal could see where the joint had blanched. If the guy so much as sneezed, then their brains would be splattered all over the boo-boo station. There's no need for that, mate," said Cal, more tremor than voice. "We're not going to do anything." "Got that right," said the man, still walking towards them. The barrel of the shotgun was like two dark, unblinking eyes. "How many of you are there here?" Brick and Cal glanced at each other. "How many?" the man demanded. "5, blurted Cal. "One of us is injured." "Where?" Back there," said Cal, tilting his head over his shoulder. "In the pavilion. We're just kids." "Fatty, go check they're not armed." The big kid didn't buzz. "Do it!" the man yelled, making the boy jump so hard his flesh wobbled beneath his shirt. He trotted over, apologising beneath his breath as he patted down Cal and then Brick. His eyes didn't rise above their kneecaps. He scampered out of the way as soon as he'd finished. "Nothing," he whispered. "Right, turn and start walking," said the gunman. "Take me to where the others are. Hands on your heads." "What do you want?" asked Cal, obeying. He didn't really want his back to the guy, but he didn't see how he had a choice. "I want answers," said the man. "Shift, or I swear you'll be dead before you hit the floor." Cal started back the way they'd come, his hands clamped in his hair. Brick walked by his side, his face pale and downturned. This is going to get nasty. The thought hit Cal hard. It wasn't just a fear, it was a premonition. Somebody is going to get hurt. And those words were still ringing in his mind when he stepped out of the shadows and the gun went off. Oh my God, I don't even remember this bit. Rilke, Fursville, 11:22 a.m. Something's wrong. Rilke looked up from her brother when Daisy spoke. The younger girl was sitting on a chair beside the sofa, huddled into herself and shivering. They'd been here for hours now, throwing more blankets on cold, unresponsive Schiller and sorting out the food into piles. Daisy had tried to start a few conversations, but Rilke had been too tired to throw back more than a couple of words. This time, though, there was an urgency in her voice. What? Rilke asked. There were plenty of things wrong. Schiller, for one, his skin like marble, radiating cold, and the world. Right now, the whole world was wrong. It's Cal, said Daisy, getting to her feet and standing there trembling. In the flickering candlelight, there was something not quite real about her, something fairy-like in her saucer-shaped eyes and her ghosted skin. He's going to die. What? Rilke said again, frowning. Cal? Why? I don't know why. I just know. Rilke used the sofa to pull herself up off her knees, brushing the dust from her skirt. Her pulse was fast, and in its rhythm she understood that Daisy wasn't being hysterical. She wasn't making it up. Cal was in danger. Is it Brick? She asked. There was something about the tall boy that Rilke didn't trust, something in his face and in the way he'd avoided answering her when she'd asked about his girlfriend. He'd looked guilty. Daisy shook her head, her eyes on the floor and yet also somewhere else, somewhere far away. It's not Brick, he's in danger too. We all are. Come on, said Rilke, holding out her hand. Daisy took it, her skin fever-hot compared to Schiller's. They began to walk towards the door, but Daisy stopped, shaking herself free and running to the far side of the restaurant. She slid a carrier bag out from beneath a table, rummaging inside it and pulling out something big. She ran back across the room and held it out to Rilke. It was a gun. Where did you get this? Rilke asked as she took the weapon. It was heavier than it looked. She'd used guns before, shotguns mainly. Schiller loved to shoot the pigeons and the rats for target practice, and she'd often gone out with him, mainly because there wasn't much else to do. It's Cal's, Daisy said, her tone more urgent now. She kept glancing at the door. Brick hid it, but I found it when we were going through the bags. Come on, please. They linked hands again, Daisy practically dragging her out of the restaurant, down the stairs and out through the chained-up fire exit. Wait, said Rilke. Daisy, hang on. Daisy's only response was to increase her speed, racing past the pavilion's main doors towards the front of the park. Rilke trotted to keep up, and she was about to call out again when she saw them at the other end of the overgrown path. Cal and Brick emerged first, their hands on their heads like prisoners of war. Then came the long steel barrel of a shotgun, followed by a man, a teenager maybe, in a green jacket. Do it, Daisy said, skidding to a halt. Do what? Rilke thought. Shoot him? And incredibly, Daisy screamed, Yes! Shoot him now! There was no time to question it. Rilke lifted the pistol, using both thumbs to pull back the stubborn hammer. She aimed past the notch on the barrel until she found the man's face. He had a dark beard, his eyes squinting against the morning sun. She pressed both her forefingers against the trigger, a storm of thoughts all shrieking at once inside her head. You can't do this. You can't shoot a man. Then, as if they'd been vacuumed up, they vanished, leaving only one, leaving only Daisy. Do it. She squeezed. The gun resisted. Then the trigger clicked. The shot was deafening, almost jolting the pistol out of her hands. She managed to cling onto it, peering through the smoke to see that Brick and Cal were on the ground. Oh, God, I hit one of them, she thought. Then she saw them both squirming away in the dirt, trying to crawl. The guy with the shotgun was still standing, but there was a crimson tear down the left side of his face, stretching from his cheek to his ear. She'd grazed him. His expression of shock was so extreme it was almost comical. It seemed to take him an age to see Rilke, and as he started to swing his shotgun around, she took a step forward, aiming her weapon at his head. The next one won't miss, she said, staring him dead on. I swear to God. The shotgun stayed down, pointing at Cal's back. Both boys looked up at her, their faces distorted by fear. The gunman's shock was fast becoming anger. Even from where she was standing, Rilke could feel it burning off him. But there was something else too, the same weird clanging silence she'd felt just before meeting Daisy and the others. This guy was one of them. He is, but he's a bad man. Please, Rilke, do it. I don't want Cal to die. Had Daisy said that, or was it just in her head? Either way, the little girl's voice blasted everything else away. Drop it, she shouted, her finger tensing. Was she supposed to cock the gun again? Do it right now. Right now. Blood was trickling from the man's wound, but he still wasn't letting go of his weapon. She thumbed back the hammer, the click barely audible over the feedback like wine in her ears. Please, Rilke. Daisy's voice again, right in the flesh of her brain. I know you don't believe me, but... He's going to kill him, Daisy said, this last part out loud, the switch making Rilke reel. The little girl was sobbing now, her words fractured. He's gonna die. The gunman tensed, his face screwed into a wicked grimace. He raised the gun slightly so that the barrel was pointing right at Cal's head. Cal was on his back now, his arms up in front of him, frozen like one of the sculptures in the White Witch's palace. The bearded guy never took his eyes from Rilke. Yeah, he sneered. What if I... Rilke pulled the trigger, bracing herself this time. The gun barked, but she let her arms absorb the recoil, watching as the man staggered back, a perfectly round hole punched into his forehead. It was gross. Even though he was dead, he had to be dead. He still stared at her, something keeping his body rigid, upright, something stopping him from crashing to the white heat, burning bright as phosphorus. The man exploded, like a nuclear bomb detonating in the middle of the park. A shockwave tore outwards, crumpling the food booths on either side of the path. Rilke didn't even have time to scream as she saw it hurricane towards her, ripping her from the ground and sending her spinning backwards into the wall of the pavilion. It could have been a fraction of a second, or a million years later, that she remembered how to open her eyes. Debris still flew from the impact of the shock, moving in slow motion as if time had been knocked off its axis. Metal poles were falling ridiculously slowly from the big wheel, thudding into the ground like giant javelins. Brick and Cal were in mid-air, rolling like rag dolls as they were hurled away from the source of the detonation. The gunman, was suspended over the path, his arms out to his sides like he was being crucified. His whole body shimmered, red hot. Suddenly his head snapped back, his spine arching, and his body seemed to split, like two ropes on either side had just been pulled taut. Inside him was an inferno, almost too bright to look at, but Rilke didn't turn away. She didn't blink. She couldn't. Because something was coming out of the man. It could have been another man, except this one was too big, and this one was made of fire, ferocious blue-white flames. Its distended jaw hung open in a silent scream, and the fire stretched outwards from its back, unfurling like twin sails. Its eyes blazed, and in those broken seconds the thing looked at Rilke, burning right into the fabric of her soul. Then another shockwave ripped outwards, atomizing the man's body and the thing which clawed its way out of it, blowing the hot dog stand to ash before slamming into her. She dropped into darkness. Weirder and weirder. How are we doing for time? Daisy, Fursville, 11:48 a.m. Daisy was burning. She sat up, noticing that her skirt was smouldering gently, and slapping at it until the dull embers died out. Smoke hung in the air all around her, a silvery gauze that looked more like morning mist. It smelled bad, like when her mum sometimes pulled hair from the brush and threw it on the fire. She was lying in the middle of the weed-littered path that led past the pavilion up to the sea. And what was she doing here? She clambered to her feet, staring. That was a furious burp. She clambered to her feet, staring through the smoke to see that one of the food places, the one with the big soft drink on the roof, was on fire. The whole place was a mess. The little shack on the other side of the path, the one with the hot dog, was totally gone. Further down was a huge crater in the concrete, so charred that it looked like a vast hole in the ground, the kind a giant spider might suddenly crawl out of. There was a man standing there, A man with a gun, she thought, and with that thought the memories returned, fighting each other to be the first in line. She'd seen something in her head, like a badly filmed home movie of Cal being shot. It had been horrible. She'd told Rilke, and they'd come out here with the gun. Rilke. Daisy couldn't sense her the way she'd been sensing people recently, those little ice cubes in her mind. She couldn't see Cal or Brick up there in her head either. There was an ice cube, though, one with a room that looked like a dentist's place, with a big chair. She could see a poster with a kitten on the ceiling. But then there were no people in the ice cube. What had happened? Rilke had shot the man, hadn't she? And it was okay because he'd been a nasty man, a really nasty man. He was the one who'd been going to kill Cal. It hadn't been very nice watching the man die, even though he'd deserved it. But then what? Daisy had seen something inside the man, a fire that howled, that tried to pull itself loose. She must have passed out and seen those things in a dream. So why the smoke? And where was everybody? She started down the path, feeling woozy. Great big metal needles stuck out of the ground like hedgehog bristles. Daisy looked up, wondering if they'd fallen from the big wheel. It was lucky nobody had been spiked. There was a pile of rags up against the pavilion doors, and she almost dismissed it until she realised who it was. "Rilke!" Daisy yelled, stumbling over the cracked ground. The girl's face was covered with soot, and there was no sign of life. "Help!" Daisy yelled. "Somebody, please help!" What were you supposed to do if someone wasn't alive? Breathe into their mouth or something? They'd done it at school with a plastic dummy. The ABC rule. A was for, what, a heartbeat? It didn't sound right. But Daisy pressed her fingers against Rilke's neck, praying to feel something there. Pulse, 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 rapid like a rabbit's. Daisy almost cried with relief, stroking Rilke's long, dark hair away from her face. "Is anyone here?" she called out again. Then, more softly, "I'll be right back, Rilke. I'm going to find help. It's going to be okay." She set off again, heading for the front of the park towards that gaping crater. Please don't let anything come out of it. "Hello? Cal? I need you!" "Daisy?" It wasn't so much a shout as a groan, uttered from somewhere to her right. She walked towards the splintered remains of the hot dog stand, treading carefully over the rubble. There were a few crates beyond, and half a breeze block wall that was covered in scribbled writing. Past it she could see a pair of feet, one in a trainer and the other in just a sock. They were moving. "Cal?" She ran around the wall to see Cal sitting on the path. He was a mess too, and some of his hair was missing, giving him a funny bald patch just above his right ear. He saw her coming and tried to get up, collapsing onto his bum. Daisy crouched down beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder. There was a big rip across the front of his t-shirt. "Are you okay?" "I think so," he said, patting his hands over his body. "I seem to be all there anyway." He smiled, but it obviously caused him quite a bit of pain. "Help me up, yeah?" Daisy grabbed his arm and he used it to pull himself to his feet. He stood for a moment, his hands on his knees, his eyes scrunched shut. "What the hell happened?" he asked. "I feel like I was hit by a lorry." "Guys!" Daisy turned to see Brick limping towards them down the same path. He had coal dark rings around his eyes like a raccoon, and there was blood dripping from his left arm. Daisy was glad to see him, especially when he gave her a weak smile. "Are you all right?" "I'm okay," she said, "but Rilke is hurt. She's not waking up. She needs help." "Is she breathing?" Brick asked. Daisy nodded. If she had a heartbeat, then she had to be breathing, didn't she? Brick coughed, hacking up a rust-coloured gob of spit. "We've got to get the fire out first. If people see it, they'll call the fire brigade or send for the police." "You got any water?" Cal said. Brick shook his head, jogging towards the burning stall. Cal ran after him, hobbling in his one shoe. Daisy followed, still not wanting to get too close to the crater. By the time she'd skirted around the edge, Brick and Cal were pulling the front wall of the drink stand free, releasing a fresh plume of smoke. The fire flared up as it gorged on the fresh supply of air, but Brick didn't hesitate, stamping and kicking on the flames until the plume of smoke began to wither and die. He stumbled away, coughing so much that Daisy didn't know how he could manage her breath. "Where are the rest of them?" he said when he'd finished, clutching his wounded arm. Tears painted black stripes down his face. "You see them anywhere?" The rest of who, she thought, as Brick and Cal set off again. She ran after them as they wove through the spikes in the ground, trying to keep up, not wanting to be left on her own. "There!" she heard Brick yell. He turned the corner by the carousel, vanishing behind more debris by the side of the path. Daisy heard a voice, a panicked shout, and suddenly there were more ice cubes sliding around in her brain. Even before she turned the corner, she knew she was going to see 3 people there, 2 boys and a girl. "We weren't with him!" the girl was shouting, holding her hands up in surrender as Brick stormed towards her. Her hair was red, almost the same colour as his, and her face was streaked with dirt and smoke. "We didn't know him!" "Brick, hold up," said Cal. "I think they're telling the truth." Brick stopped, taking a deep, rattling breath. The little boy in the Batman t-shirt edged cautiously around him, sidestepping towards Cal and casting quick glances at Daisy. The dentist ice cube was his, she realised, and she could see more now, a man in a white suit screaming through a face mask and reaching for him over the chair. "Adam," she said, seeing his name in the ice. He turned at the sound of it, his blood-stained brow creasing. She held out her hand. "Come on, it's okay, you're safe here now." He walked to her straight away, not looking back, and she took his hand. "Do you want to come inside? We've got some food and some fizzy drinks." He didn't smile, but he didn't let go either. Daisy looked back at Brick, who was pacing from one side of the path to the other like a caged tiger. Cal was just behind him. The girl and the other boy were terrified. Daisy could feel their fear inside her, like the ice cubes were melting, bleeding their emotions into hers. She didn't like it. "Who was he?" Brick said. "Christ, he must have been carrying a bomb or something." "I picked him up," the overweight boy was saying. "The same way as the others, only he had the gun and he—" "It's okay," said Cal. "Right, Brick? It's okay. We can trust them. Everyone just calm down." Brick snapped his hands up in an angry shrug. More blood dripped over his fingers, pattering on the ground. "It's just the 3 of you?" he asked. "Nobody else?" The boy and the girl looked at each other, but it was the little kid by her side, Adam, who gave it away. Daisy saw a silver car inside his ice cube, a big one, and something thumping and shrieking in the boot, something with blood on its breath. "There's one more," said the girl, looking up the path that led outside of the park. The plump boy finished for her. "But it isn't one of us." How are we doing for time? I'm going to do one more. Brick, Fursville, 12:09 p.m. And there are fizzy drinks, that is the trouble. Fizzy drinks. So I apologise for any burps. Brick, Fursville. Did I just say that? 12:09 p.m. I can't remember. The redhead's name was Jade. The fat kid was Chris. They told Brick this as they walked back down the side of the Boo-Boo station and out through the gap in the laurel hedge. Daisy had taken the little boy inside and Cal had gone to check on Rilke. Brick kind of wished he had their job and they had his, but he didn't trust them to be able to deal with the situation. He certainly didn't trust the boy and the girl beside him. Whatever they said, they'd brought the gunman here, they'd led him to the park. He looked at his arm, an ugly gash across his bicep. At least the blood had slowed to a trickle. He wasn't going to bleed out. He'd been lucky. They all had. Who the hell carried a bomb on them? And yet there was something at the back of his head that told him it wasn't a bomb. A memory scratching against his skull. He'd been looking right at the man when he'd exploded. Hadn't there been something there? Something crawling out of him, with a body made of fire? "Don't be an idiot, Brick. It's the adrenaline talking." "It's just there," said Chris. He nodded towards a silver car parked at an angle on the curb. It was a snob's car, a Jag or something. Huge. There were bloodstains on the bonnet. Brick could already hear thumps from the boot and a weak, groaning cry. "We didn't have a choice," said Jade. She had an accent that Brick couldn't quite place, something northern. "That guy, the one with the gun—" I can't do a northern accent, sorry. "He knocked him out and he struck him in the boot. Woke up, I don't know, half an hour before we got here and he's been trying to beat his way out ever since." "Weird thing is, when we're not anywhere near him, he acts normal," said Chris. "Like now, shout something to him and he'll probably shout back." They both looked at Brick expectantly. He nodded his head. "I know, they're all doing that." He sighed, swearing under his breath. They couldn't leave the car out here. The first person who saw it would call the police. They couldn't bring it into Fursville either. There was nowhere big enough to get it through the fence. They could take it to the car park where he'd met Cal and Daisy last night, but he didn't fancy a 10-minute drive with a feral in the boot. Fursville had a car park of its own. It was locked up, but they could probably find a way in. Whoever was inside must have heard them, because the voice got louder, still muffled but now audible. "Please, let me out! I promise I won't tell!" And suddenly it was Lisa inside that car, clawing for oxygen in the heat, scraping at the lock with her nails. Brick clamped his eyes shut until the image disappeared. You got the keys?" he asked. "They're in the ignition," Chris said. "We can park it in there," he said, pointing at the Fursville lot. "You'll have to ram the fence. We'll hide the car, work out what to do with him later." Chris nodded. He wobbled over to it, taking a deep breath before sliding into the driver's seat. Jade stayed by Brick's side. "I'm not getting back in there," she said when he looked at her. She didn't offer an explanation, just folded her hands over her chest as if she were cold. Brick walked down the pavement, the bootman's voice now a series of howling barks. The thumps got louder, the metal boot lid shaking as he pounded it from inside. 50 metres down was the entrance to the Fursville car park. The main gates bolted shut. The fence here wasn't so big, though. Chris swung the car out, then lurched back onto the curb, ploughing into the fence with a sound like fingernails running down a blackboard. The engine growled, but he didn't let up, revving hard until the wire snapped and the car jolted through. "Over there," Brick shouted, pointing towards the huge hedge which separated the car park from Fursville. There was a small wooden office, a garden shed really, where you'd once had to pay a quid. "Drive in as far as you can, the other side of that building." Chris obeyed, steering the car over the rough dirt until the bonnet disappeared into the hedge. It penetrated as far as the middle of the roof before hitting something and crunching to a halt. There was a cacophony of rustling snaps and grunts before Chris appeared, batting branches away from his face. He stepped gingerly away, looking forlornly at the battered Jag. "Oh, dude, my dad's going to murder me when he sees his car," he said, blanching when he realised what he'd said. He bared his teeth in a bitter, humourless smile. "Again." The voice from the boot was even louder now, the snarls of a caged animal. But the car was pretty well hidden, Brick thought, the small office concealing it from the road. He'd grab some boards from the park and cover it up properly once they'd decided what to do about the man inside. "Come on," he said, turning and heading towards the ruined fence. "Let's get back. Something tells me we need to talk." Okay. Right, we'll stop there for today. I know it's another short one, but I've got to go and get my kids from school. Yeah, it's getting interesting. I've completely forgotten about this new bunch of arrivals. And it'd be interesting to see what they have to say and what happens next. This is as much of an adventure for me as it is for you, because my memory is so shockingly awful that even though I wrote this book, I can't remember a thing about it. So I'm enjoying this. But anyway, I hope you are too. And I'm sure I will see you tomorrow. Or at some point in the not too distant future. Take care. I don't know why I've started saluting. I just look like such a doofus, don't I? Saluting at the end of every episode. It's just like one of those things you do. So I'm not going to salute anymore. So this is my final salute. Take care. And I'll have to find something else to do. But yes, have fun. Lovely to see you. Enjoy your afternoon. Goodbye.